Thank you very much. Thank you for that great introduction. Yeah, I'm really excited about this panel as well. So basically, I'd just like to start off before we dive in, a very quick introduction from each of our panelists, just letting us know what your projects are doing in the space. So we can start, Silvares?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Sarvis, the CEO and co-founder of Band Protocol. Quickly, what we do, we essentially build a decentralized Oracle service, right? What Oracle is essentially we connect blockchain smart contract with external data and APIs so that they can consume the data that lives outside of blockchain in the most secure and reliable manner.
Okay, great. Arnav?
Yes,
sorry,
hi.
Your name's wrong.
That's no problem. I'm used to it. So my name is Arnaud Lehors. I'm from IBM, and I'm the chair of the Hyperledger Technical Steering Committee. And so this is what I really want to talk about today, is what's going on in Hyperledger. Hyperledger is a collaborative project under the Linux Foundation, and basically hosts development of open source software for the enterprise for blockchain. And so we actually have several projects going on that touch on smart contracts. There are no fewer than 6 different blockchain frameworks now within Hyperledger. So it's really an umbrella with many different projects. Among the 6, 5 of them have smart contracts of some kind or another.
So we can come back to all of those during the panel discussion. If we can move on to Nicolas.
Hi, my name is Nicolas Arqueros. I'm the CTO of Emurgo. Emurgo is a global solutions company. We develop solutions for governments, startups, enterprises. We are also one of the entities that founded Cardano. I'm also one of the council members of the Cardano Foundation and a senior advisor for the Lab, a blockchain acceleration program based in New York.
Awesome. And then finally, Artem.
Hi. My name is Artem Kalikhov, and I'm Chief Product Officer of Waves Enterprise. We in Waves Enterprise are developing hybrid enterprise-ready blockchain platform. It consists of public permissioned Waves Enterprise mainnet and private chains, connected or not connected to our mainnet. Hybrid means that we're proposing to our customers to have synergy of benefits of public blockchains, like through decentralization, wide coverage and community, crypto economics, with benefits of private networks, access control and role management, security and data privacy, and high throughput. From technological perspective, we have decent throughput, proof of stake and proof of authority consensuses during complete smart contracts based on container technology, private data exchange, and many other tools that are required to implement blockchain into business.
Right, and that's Waves Enterprise, correct? Because the volume, I think, is a little bit low.
Yes, Waves Enterprise.
Okay, perfect. So there's obviously an awful lot going on in the space since smart contracts came out 6 years ago or so. But just briefly, can we touch on what the very first smart contracts could do? What were their functions and what were their limitations? That's free for anyone. Or I'm going to pick someone. Nicolas?
Something really interesting that when we think about smart contracts, we all think about Ethereum, but actually the first smart contracts were like in Bitcoin, and they were like super limited. They were not, as some people would say, Ethereum complete. So they would do some specific functions like, for example, multi-sig, escrows, payment channels, time logs, and even, for example, atomic swap. So they were like super limited and mostly were related to transactions. So for example, if you want to have like multiple ways to secure an account, maybe you will need like multiple signatures, and that's why it means by multi-signature. So they were like super helpful, but they didn't unlock all the functionalities and everything that we are seeing today. For example, something that wouldn't have been able to exist with this smart contract is what we see with the stablecoin of DAI, because it requires like different degrees of like complexity that wouldn't be able to be done with this limited smart contract.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think for me, right? I mean, if it comes to smart contract, we need to break it down into smart and the contract part, right? And I think most people understand the contract part, where essentially is an agreement between two parties, right? And traditionally that requires trust, because essentially if you agree to something with someone, either that is legally binding, and that means again you need to trust the entities that enforce such conditions, right? And you also have to trust the counterparty not to essentially run, right? And that is a traditional contract between two parties. And now I think in the era where blockchain application come into place, we have something that is smart, which is smart contract. Essentially, you don't have to trust the other parties, but you trust that the code will automatically enforce such conditions, right? Or such agreement between two parties, whether that be lending protocol like Compound, whether that be stablecoin like Maker. You don't have to trust the entity that make it, but you trust that the code will work. If I send Ethereums, I can borrow DAI per the conditions. And if I return DAI, I can get back my Ethereums, right, per the contract. So I think that is the new paradigms that we are seeing, where we now can create something like smart contract with marginal cost and marginal trust, right, essentially in a trustless world. And that's something really powerful, and that allowed us to create a much more, I guess, contract between anyone in the world in the most trustless way possible. And I guess we're going to go into the use cases later on. But to me, that's I guess it's go back to the question, why smart contract is so important, and why we start to see much more use cases coming out in the past couple of years.
And Arnaud, yeah, you obviously brought up that a lot of people think about, and Nicolas, that a lot of people associate still smart contracts with Ethereum. But there are so many platforms that are smart contract platforms. So can you tell us a little bit about Hyperledger, and also briefly perhaps touch on, obviously smart contracts had vulnerabilities in the past. We've all heard of the DAO hack and several other incidents. Smart contracts are obviously now a lot more robust. So perhaps you can talk us through what changes have been made and what's going on at another level.
So first of all, I would like to say, contrary to what Sarvis just said, usually we don't consider smart contract to either be smart or contracts. And so they're not contracts because they're not legally enforceable. And then they are not smart because they're just programs, and programs are oddly smart. They are as smart as you make them, I suppose. But, that's a terminology issue. In Hyperledger Fabric, for instance, for this reason, we call it chain code. And it really refers to code that's, run on the chain. And it's essentially at a very technical level. It's the equivalent of a database store procedures. It's what you run on the back end. And at a high level, in the enterprise blockchain setting, what they are essentially used for is to enforce the validity of the transactions. Both, the data that is sent for a given transaction is indeed valid, so you have all the bits and pieces you expect, but also that this transaction is valid at this particular point in time in the overall, state machine of the application, if you will. But so different blockchain platforms make different choices on how to support this notion of smart contracts. And so, as I was saying, in Hyperledger, we have many different frameworks. They use very different technologies to do that. There are some common points. We have obviously two frameworks that are Ethereum clients, so they support the EVM, and several other projects have bridges that allow that as well. But in Hyperledger Fabric, for instance, we support any kind of general purpose programming languages. So you can use Go and Node and JavaScript and Java and so on. But back to what you were saying about, trying to make progress and address some of the issues that we've seen in the past, we've also have work on formal proof languages, things like Haskell, that can be more suitable to actually do formal proofing of the smart contract. So you could actually statically verify that this actually does what you expect and nothing more, like we've seen in the DAO. And so I think there is plenty of work that is still going on in that space.
Okay, awesome. And Artem, for you? How do you see smart contracts have evolved?
As for me, I think we need to separate smart contracts and the code is used in public platforms and in enterprise platforms. Because at the moment, the most public platforms have a lot of limitations to smart contracts. For example, Ethereum, you need a gas to power your smart contract, and you cannot create the logic of any complexity in a public blockchain network. And for enterprise platforms, for enterprise usage, you need sometimes very complex logic in your smart contract, because you may need to automate some business process on the blockchain to ensure safety of the data that is used in that business process to process documents in that smart contract. And the architecture of smart contract that is used in public blockchains is not suitable for private platforms. So at the moment, I think we have a separation between two worlds, two architectures, and two approaches to develop smart contracts and to use smart contracts.
And so how much of an issue still then is interoperability of platforms? Is that an ongoing thing?
As for me, the question of interoperability from business perspective, it is not rising high at the moment, because despite the fact that businesses are the main driver of blockchain technology development, they are just launching first pilots, first prototypes, first production projects with blockchain, and it is not right time to question about interoperability of that projects. They need to settle the right production environment for their own maybe consortium platforms, consortium networks. And the next step will be the interoperability of that consortiums. That means that imagine that you have some supply chain network when some participants are collaborating, like manufacturers, logistic companies, suppliers, and customers. And you have the separate financial chain where you have some financial products. And with the interoperability, you can have a synergy of two chains: one supply chain with the supply chain smart contracts, and the second chain with the financial contracts. And I think it will be the next step. I think it will be in the next several years, in 21st and 22nd.
Okay. Does someone else want to jump in on that also?
Yes. So if I may, it happens that yesterday I participated in a European Commission workshop on standardization for blockchain, and I was actually invited to speak on a panel about standardization of smart contracts, as a matter of fact. And so we talked quite a bit about this aspect of interoperability, and I think there's definitely interest in trying to achieve this, where you would have smart contracts that are written once and for all. The reality is still very hard, and there are many different reasons for this. The challenges we're facing have to do with the fact that the technology is still very young and evolving very quickly. There are different points of interaction the smart contract has. You interact with the client at the very base level and the ledger, and then different platforms will have different interfaces to do that, and there are different features that can only be accessed if you have specific interfaces to do that. But there's also a whole world exploding with, we heard earlier references to oracles. So there's also how the smart contract interfaces with oracles. We also have work in Hyperledger on trusted execution environment, where you can encapsulate your smart contract within a trusted environment to execute in a more secure environment. And that comes with its own APIs again. And so I think, unfortunately, even though there's a lot of interest in that space, there's still a long way to go, because, as I said, it's still a very moving target. So standardizing in that space is very difficult.
For sure. So my next question I'd like to throw at, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, at Saravis.
That's
Because
correct.
I'm sure you're dying to speak about it. I'd like to talk a bit more about decentralized oracles. Why are they so important? As far as I understand it, most centralized exchanges are still using centralized oracles. So what can they avoid? What are the benefits of using decentralized oracles?
Right. I think this sort of go back to another point as well. The fact that smart contract is not that smart. And I think I totally agree with that point. Just a matter of terminologies, right? But the fact is, smart contract is deterministic, right? The fact that they execute them according to the orders is fully deterministic, and the fact that they live in the blockchain, that means they cannot access this, information outside of the blockchain world, right? And that makes the use case fairly limited. And that's why they require Oracle, which is essentially a service that connect this data into blockchain so they can execute their logic. Now, of course, if the Oracle is not fully decentralized, that means your smart contract depends exactly on Oracle, right? If Oracle is compromised, or if that Oracle essentially act maliciously, then the smart contract essentially will be collapsed, right? I mean, think of it. If I write a logic that says, "Hey, I want to bet with Arno whether Chelsea gonna win Premier League tomorrow," right? It requires Oracle to essentially tell us whether Chelsea win the match or not, right? And if an Oracle depend on a centralized entities, that entities has total control of how smart contract will behave, right? Even if Chelsea win, they can just say, "Oh, Chelsea actually lose," and then the money got transferred from person A to person B in an incorrect manner, right? So that's why it's really, really important that if we are to really build a fully decentralized applications in the most trustless way possible, you need a fully decentralized Oracle, right? So then you don't have to trust or depend on one particular solution. And yes, to Arno's point, this is still really early beginnings. I think including BAN and other Oracle solutions is a really difficult problem. Oracle is not something you can solve with 100% certainties because it's not mathematically verifiable, right? Unlike transactions where, I think everyone can agree 100% if something bad happened, right? To agree whether the data is bad, that's really subjective manner, right? Whether Bitcoin is 9,500 or 9,450, you and me may not even agree on that fact, right? So it's a really difficult problems. It requires a lot of token economics to work out. It requires a lot of this, privacy issues, a lot of the safety issues with T and all these other, I guess technologies that we're going to see in the future. But if smart contract is to gain mass adoption and smart contract to be fully decentralized, you will really need fully decentralized Oracle, and that's why we're here, and that's why we try to, obviously it's a long way to go, but we are here to research and hopefully build a fully decentralized Oracle for that.
Okay. Nicholas, do you have any words to say on that?
To complement what was already said. So basically, blockchain can read information inside the blockchain, but oracles allow you to gather information from outside. And this is really important because, for example, for DeFi, decentralized finance, you need to actually have information about what is the price of the dollar against some cryptocurrency, what is the price of gold, or for example, some like more advanced financial assets like the S&P 500 and others. So they're like really important. But right now, the space is like a little messy. Why? Because usually you have like the source of information, and then you have like a platform for like getting the information through oracles, and then you have the blockchain. So usually what happens is that we're trying to only decentralize this part sometimes, and the source of information usually from everything that's needed right now, it comes from like trusted sources. For example, Bloomberg or like NASDAQ. So there is like two types of source of information. For example, they were also mentioning like, for example, a soccer game. Maybe we're going to be asking people to say who won or who didn't. So sometimes it's like on this part of the source of information, it's better to go with like trusted entities. And what is the problem that happened afterwards is that we have all these like people trying to participate by like connecting to this source of information, and they get rewarded by tokens. But sometimes if we already are trusting this source of information, maybe we need to just give them the tools so we can access their information directly. What this means that right now we could have like identities and this like source of information, like for example, Bloomberg, they could have a signature that we could like corroborate on the blockchain. So we wouldn't need to have like a distributed way to like multiple people tell me, oh, this is what Bloomberg said. But actually, we will be able to verify what Bloomberg said because we will be able to verify their signature. And why we go through all this like complicated thing about oracles? Why is this important? Because not only is the part that smart contract can get hacked, but if the smart contract, some of them continue to grow, now some of them are in $100 million, they get to billions, or maybe if they get to dozens of millions of dollars, the hackers are going to be able to, they're always going to be looking for the weak link, and it could happen that the source of information is the weak link. Something that, for example, has worked so far, but maybe it could be broke, is that, for example, in DAI, how do they know what is the price of the dollar? They have some oracles, but they have 7 or something like that. So it's like, it's still something that could give you like a little chills, and it's something that we need to improve as an entire ecosystem.
So how do you sell this to enterprises or to everyday people? I've heard you say the technology is not there yet. The space is a little messy. We've still got a long way to go. Just how reliable are the smart contracts and the oracles that you're building that can go to anybody?
So if I will jump in, I mean, IBM is fully focused on the enterprise use case, obviously, and I have to admit, and it will be considered heresy for a lot of crypto hardcore people. In the enterprise, I think they are more willing to compromise between, having a purely, completely decentralized environment or system and having something that they can practically use right away today that provides high performance, etc. So there is a little bit of trade-offs there that needs to be done in terms of smart contracts. In platforms like Hyperledger Fabric, there's also the other aspect we haven't touched on, but which is important, is what is the governance of the smart contract? Who decides to upgrade the smart contract? How, when, etc. And so, for instance, in Hyperledger Fabric, in the latest version, Fabric 2.0, we added a whole new life cycle for the chain code, which goes through essentially a consensus process with the same kind of consensus process as any transaction. And so, the enterprise are comfortable with this kind of compromise, and they want more and more decentralized, and we are going to move forward and add more and more. But, when it comes to Oracle, for instance, they typically don't have a problem with saying, hey, we're going to trust one entity to provide the latest stock price, for instance, as it was just talked about. Because typically today, they already live in a world where they do that on a daily basis for about everything. And, it's not a black and white issue. And this is where I think people tend to make mistakes, is that when honestly trying to say, oh, everything has to be fully decentralized, otherwise it's useless. We're trying to say, well, going to a system that's blockchain based already will move you forward towards decentralization. And maybe not everything is absolutely decentralized today, but we're getting there, and just stick with us. And most enterprises are totally comfortable with this.
Awesome. Anyone else want to comment on that? How do you sell to your customers?
So, for example, one of our investments is called Sempo, and Sempo works with NGOs to help them get money to people in need in multiple countries. Basically, for example, people that have been hit by some problems, and this could be like in Iraq, Lebanon, Vanuatu, Kenya, and they have been using DAI for this. So basically, there's a lot of people that are unbanked, and so they don't have bank accounts. So when NGOs want to help them, they cannot do bank transfer to them. And what Sempo has been doing is super smart. I really like it. Is that they have been using a stable coin pegged to the US dollar, because what they realized that actually most of these people, obviously they don't have an iPhone, but they still have a phone that they could use, and they receive a stable coin in their phone. And in partnership with local vendors. These people can go to these local vendors and buy stuff with their phone, and then the local vendors actually have bank accounts, and then they do the transferring from like this stable coin for like fiat. And this process is faster, cheaper, and they have already like been doing this in multiple countries, and they are like already transferring the $100,000. So although the technology is not quite there, we are still like already seeing like some like really cool usages.
Right. So there's already some really, really cool use cases. So we've seen obviously where smart contracts began, more or less, where we are now. Where are we going to be in, say, 5 years from now? Saravis, I'm so sorry, I can't pronounce your name.
No worry. Well, that's a tough question, because if I know, I'm probably going to be a billionaire. But I mean, to me, right, I do believe that, like I said, smart contract hopefully will be smarter with the introduction of more decentralized Oracle that really connects smart contract to the real world use cases. We can see major players, major conglomerates, just like IBM, right? We have Facebook Libra, we have, other banks in Thailand and around the world jumping into this market. Not just from a perspective of using, digital currencies, but from a perspective of actually using smart contract in their, operations or in the business somewhere, right? And that will come with the introduction of Oracle, with the introduction of a better, platforms, whether that be Hyperledger, whether that be, a fully cross-chain compatible solutions, smart contract platforms that really scale to their use cases, right? I mean, if you look at the current state of even DeFi, where people say, hey, we have a lot of adoptions, we are really tiny, right? We are less than probably like 0.01% actually have been interacting with DeFi. The speed and the UX UI of DeFi is, essentially is really bad, right? And if you look at that compared to the centralized finance right now, not just from traditional bank, but centralized exchange, we are far, far behind that. And I do think that in the next few years, as more scalable solutions come to market, even with Ethereum 2.0 and 3.0 or whatever, we'll start to see a much better offerings that really beat or comparable to the centralized solutions. And by that, we're probably going to be seeing much more real adoptions from both the retail users as well as from the corporation perspective.
Mm-hmm. Artem?
From my point of view, I think in 5 years we need more higher throughput for smart contracts, because at the moment it cannot compete with centralized systems. And from enterprise perspective, it is often important to have a high throughput and high performance for enterprise platforms that are integrated with the classical centralized information systems. And I think in 5 years, we need to have a synergy of emerging technologies like blockchain with smart contracts, IoT, and maybe artificial intelligence. So in that way that IoT and AI can be powered by blockchain, and some scripts, some mathematical models, some IoT models can be launched and executed on the blockchain, ensuring the integrity of the data. And at the moment, I know that enterprise smart contract technology, like is used in Hyperledger Fabric and in our platform, is suitable for that kind of operations. But there are a little question about that smart contracts, about deterministic execution of that smart contracts, but I think it can be solved in that 5 years for sure. So I think we need more synergy of emerging technologies in 5 years.
It'd be interesting to have this conversation again in 5 years.
Yeah.
And Nicholas, how about you? What do you see? And also, I just wanted to ask, how big is Ethereum moving to 2.0? How big a thing is that to the space? Obviously, pretty massive, huh?
Yeah, I think it's like a pretty massive change, but also sort of like leaves this like a smart contract blockchain open, because they're moving to 2.0 because they have so many issues that they're trying to improve, and maybe they don't nail it, and some of the other contenders like Ethereum killers can like stand up. I think some of the stuff from Ethereum 2.0 is not like crazy enough, because innovation can happen in two different ways. We can have gradual changes, or we can have like this abrupt, like giant leaps. And I think like there are multiple blockchains that are like trying to do these giant leaps. And for example, in Cardano, what we are doing is that instead of having an account-based smart contract platform like Ethereum, we have a UTXO-based smart contract. And this is like pretty cool because, for example, when you are going to do all these innovations, all of them, they need to talk well. And what is the difference with UTXO-based is that, for example, we allow for concurrency in a smart contract. So the same smart contract could be like being run in parallel. And this is super important because, for example, a lot of like the issues related to scalability that we have been talking as an industry, they are related to like sharding, to cut the blockchain in multiple parts. So if we're going to be cutting the blockchain in multiple parts, we need like concurrency. So that's why we need like a lot of like different things that can talk with each other. And also you mentioned about interoperability. There are like multiple solutions for interoperability, like NIPO PAOs, like Fly clients, and even another level, they're like wrappers for like different assets. So they allow you to, although one asset is in one chain, maybe you are going to wrap it, and in another chain or in another chart, you're going to be able to transact. And this is like at the end really important because some of the major issues that we have seen for adoption is that security, scalability, interoperability, and security. So besides this thing, the last thing that I wanted to comment is that also the programming language that we see right now that most of the developers are using, like Solidity, is going to be completely different in 5 years. Why? Because right now we have seen still after the DAO, we see so many hacks. For example, we have BCX, we have also DeForce that like, I don't know, like a week after they got an investment from Multicoin for like $1.5 million, they got hacked and they got stolen like $50 million. So people can be super careful, but if we are like creating a new industry, we need to be a little bit more flexible. We need to do changes. And this is like the opposite of security. When you have security, you want to be like really conservative. So we will need like better programming language, better toolings, hopefully with formal methods, maybe even another way to code with functional programming that is going to allow us to like move a little bit quicker without like compromising that much in security.
Okay, perfect. I think we're almost out of time, so I'd just like to let Arnaud have your final say on where you believe we'll be going in about 5 years' time, and then we'll wrap up.
Right, so unfortunately, I forgot my crystal ball, but with that in mind, I'll take a chance. No, what I think is interesting is, at least in the enterprise blockchain space, what I think is going to happen is there's kind of two different layers of smart contracts consideration. There's the low level where you're really interacting with the ledger, and at this level is basically bits and pieces you store and you retrieve. But at the higher level, in the enterprise, industry by industry sectors, they are looking at how they can leverage blockchain. And in that space, they already have all sorts of standards they can leverage, right? That defines the format of the data, the process flow that they're actually implementing in their system, and transaction flow, et cetera. And so I think what might happen in the longer run is that, we're going to have two different parts of the smart contract. There is a part that's going to be higher level, that'll be more portable, back to the point you were on earlier of interoperability, where you talk at a higher level of abstraction. And there are programming languages like DAML from Digital Asset, for instance, that try to provide this kind of higher level of abstraction that then gets translated into a low level type of smart contract languages. And at a higher level, I think it's easier to have more interoperability. And like, I can imagine that in a few years' time, we will have libraries of components that you can reuse that are specific to different use cases. If you're in supply chain, how many times are you going to re-implement what it means to move an asset and trace the asset throughout the supply chain? I mean, every industry has some supply chain element, and it makes sense to do this. And so, for instance, in Hyperledger, we have a project grid that tries to do this. And they implement some existing industry standard like GS1. And, you know, if you're doing healthcare, you're going to look at HL7 type of standards. And there's, at this level, I think we might see some components that are more easily reusable across the platforms. And then there'll still be some part that's very platform specific that may require to rewrite that piece from one platform to another. But I can see how we would evolve in that direction moving forward. Okay.
Well, thank you guys very, very much for your time today. It's been an awesome panel. And let's see what happens in 5 years' time.
It has been awesome, Christina. Very well done. The smart contracts thing, we have a ton of questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I think maybe a BlockDown in the future should just be dedicated to smart contracts because, yeah, like they said, it's the holy grail of the blockchain space and such an interesting thing. But Christina, thank you very much. Our panelists, thank you guys as well. Fantastic job.
Thank you.